Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode. Right now, the weather is 1 degree Celsius in Etobicoke, Canada, and it's super windy, so it feels colder than that. But I thought that the episode may be more important than how I feel. I could be freezing, but the episode's important. To be honest, today's episode is a bit playful, simply because I had no idea what I was going to talk about, or what I am going to talk about, aside from this sentence. Live as if the future is already smiling. There has been moments where I have wondered, what kind of being am I? And I've realized I'm a being that's gonna play music in the background. Hold on. Alright, there we go. The question is arose. I mean, of course, everybody wonders about who they are, because that's the point of finding our attention and consciousness in an unknown world. I guess to dive into my own mind, there has been moments where I have struggled to give a value to something that is dynamic and changing. There's moments where I judge my own self behind my eyes, and it's kind of like, being an art critic, in these Mr.Within talks, I share this idea that there's an inner realm and there's an outer realm. And in the inner realm, we access visions of reality, but those visions, even though visible, are not tangible. So moments where I have wondered about what sort of being am I, it's as if I've had to work with the content of my own mind. And it's really, I think by now, with all the days I've woken up and my brain has simulated reality, for throughout all the moments where my consciousness has traveled through, I have become a professional, art critic, but an art critic of thought. But there are times where I wonder about the future. I notice that really what's going on for our species is that we are creatures of attention before we're creatures of a sort of conceptual position. Let me see if I can find a gentler song. Hold on, guys. People are going to be like, is Mr. Within being a DJ right now? In the middle of his talk? Okay, whatever. Let's try this song. I've pretty much noticed that there is a physical existence of creatures being positioned in a world, and this world appears to us as a rocket floating in the middle of nowhere. When I have wondered about how human experience moves, it's really where attention is going. And really, where our attention goes becomes the reality accessible in which we trust that reality and animate. What I find is that, not just Carl Jung speaking about the major archetype of the persona, how everybody in some sense has a mask, and if reality was divided between the conscious and unconscious like a coin with two sides, the conscious side of reality is individualization in accordance to environment. The unconscious is the individual's realization and that its knowledge is limited by there's unknown edges to its knowledge. So human beings, their attention is either on the past, on the present, or the future. What the past is how we have journeyed through life. What the present is where we are, what the journey has led to so far. And the future seems to be the one thing that, it's like the person goes to the educational system, and in some sense the past is being shared, being taught, simply because we don't want the mistakes in history to be repeated. But if we only teach the past, in some sense, like, the wonder of the future goes away. When I look at the educational system, I guess I'm commenting on it now. When I look at the educational system, I think of, in some sense, sure, a person needs to know the alphabet in order to understand words, and then in some sense to be capable of reading. We do need certain basic systems that are being acknowledged by everybody. But at the same time, if the human being is seen as an energy, right, we tend to think of it this way, that there's a macro perspective on human life and there's a micro perspective on human life, and it has to do with the scale of time. Scholars say there's two worlds. There's the world here before you were born and after you pass away, and then there is a world which started from the moment you were born till the moment you pass away. We tend to get more fascinated, like, imagine really what the human being is, let's say, from a macro view, from an eagle in the sky looking at human activity like a fast-forwarded film. It's kind of like we're living 100 years. Let's say 100-year lifespan. Like a video game with endless characters that only have 100 years, like, time limit. Because our experience starts right from the first-person perspective of our face, because we're looking out through our eyes and we're in a biological, let's say, existential vehicle for consciousness. We are zoomed into our own life experience, but if we were to look at it in a grander time scale, as if imagine human beings were not like, what am I going to do in this lifetime, but they were like, what am I going to do, or what would the value of 100 years of energetic existence be, in contrast to, let's say, the person wanting to do something that extends 10,000 years instead of 100 years. Technically, what our mind is a private life, and then what our decisions are or in some sense communication is from the privacy of how our attention keeps the world. We in some sense realize there's a different place where attention moves differently. Oh my god, it's so cold. Guys, I think it's... my fingers are freezing. If people type in the chat section and I can't respond, just know it's because my fingers are freezing. Honestly, I try to find a problem and then I try to solve it, and then the energy seems to, have validated its own purpose. When I think about the human species, there was a journey from the past to the present. There's an experience of the present just being present, but then there's the whole future to deal with. Now, if we are thinking of only 100 years of life of a person's thinking, okay, what's the value of my energy for 100 years? It makes sense that the person actually forgets about collective systems and just tries to experience life, right? But if you're someone who entertains the idea of, let's say, reincarnation, or if you entertain the idea that the expression of the human being can go way beyond their lifetime, there's moments where I think that these words that I'm speaking, like this talk that I'm giving, it's kind of hilarious, because there will come a time where I won't exist in this world physically, and these talks will outlive me. There's a chance that these Mr. Within talks live longer than me, of course. That's the vision. So these Mr. Within talks are my ideological attempt at eternity, at immortality. It's like the person couldn't physically be immortal, but in some sense their voice, I'm really grateful actually to cyberspace. The future generations are gonna be like, oh my god, we're forgetting nature, we're stuck in digital worlds, so we don't know who created, right? But there was a time where the biological entity, or what was behind the eyes of the biological entity, could enter a system that can outlast it. This game of knowledge, people think it's like since ancient times there's been ancient knowledge, right? There's been ancient experiential knowledge, but when it's come to, let's say, human intelligence and the ability of actually using writing to articulate reality and build a civilization, we're in some sense considering it was 5,000 years ago. The value of writing actually, it's like if writing was a technology 5,000 years ago, it started being properly used. And there is this urge, aside from cyberspace, aside from, the extension of, that feeling of ourself continuing in the world, right? It's like there is an urge, there is something in every human being that by just standing still, it's like the difference between existing and living. And I find this difference to be very similar to the contrast of velocity and speed. Speed can be considered like a sort of existence, but the purpose, velocity being direction to speed. The direction our life has turns our existence into living, into life, actually. And what's the point of evolving 4.5 billion years to have access to an inner way of modifying reality and working with reality and not using it, right? I think really what's going on is that we have from the beginning been multidimensional beings, and really our urge to pass down knowledge is the urge for our continuity in more than one dimension. There's something as if we're like bees that have, extracted the nectar of flowers, and we're like, what do we do with this nectar, you know? And the idea is to build a beehive, right? And I'm like, okay, if there were 8 billion, savage animalistic bees, you know, civilization is technically our beehive, but consciousness gives us an ability to not act in accordance to instincts and nature. I've noticed something fascinating, that when I've looked at insect life, I have looked at different, what do you call it, like lesser species, and what I have noticed is that they have consciousness to the environment, but they don't have a sophisticated self-analysis to doubt themselves. You see, what evolution did was, in some sense, make a creature capable of doubting itself, right? And that was not the case for the longest time. When we even look at the founding of many religions, religious ideology, many religions were in some sense retaliations to past empires of thought. You see, it's the nature of man to live in a certain way, and his mind familiarizes with the system, but then he finds something new and he's like, what do I do with who I have been so far if I've had a new experience, There was a time I actually thought, like, what is the intelligent being's capability to acknowledge intelligence without getting entertained or distracted from acknowledging that intelligence? And I realized, because we're emotional creatures, we will till the end of time have issues with truth. Emotions are significant because the person's like, what do I do with all my knowledge, right? It's like every person's consciousness is giving access to a reality. So consciousness is like this light that hits a sort of framework of reality, and as it reflects back, it's like what is looking through our eyes has to choose what the sight can mean. Right? If a person is very simplistic, reality doesn't have to mean anything, right? If you ask a Zen master, what is the purpose of life, right, the Zen master will stare at you silently, as if the burden of an intellectual search is unnecessary, right? But if you're trying to live a complex life, right, I mean, there's some people who have this feeling that, okay, nature is a technology and we shouldn't use any unnatural artificial technology in the case that we may forget it. But there's some people who are like, yo, I'm here once. We're stranded on a galactic island, on a cosmic island, and so we have to use all technologies accessible. The situation of the human being is so fascinating because we have forgotten our macrocosmic position, right? And because we've forgotten our macrocosmic, it's like we have lost our macrocosmic humility. So man has to entertain himself with the games of his immediate environment. The world has always been multidimensional. Every system, right, or system of thought, every school of thought, in some sense, has engaged in certain dimensions of reality. Whether the person thinks, yo, I'm a body, and in another view I'm a soul. Similarly, a person can look at an object and perceive that's not an object, that's in some sense an atomic structure, there's molecules and atoms there, right? So it's as if we have had the ability to look at something but also to see something in it. If somebody says, Mr. Within, where is the future? If somebody asks me, Mr. Within, where is the future? The answer is not outside of us. Do you know? The future is the conscious engagement of an entity that is keeping track keeping track, right? So it's another way of saying if we didn't have memories, what past is going to the future? It's just like an ever endless present, you know. You know, a percentage of life, like, okay, I'll just say it, it's like 50% of life is what do you do with what you know, and the other 50% is like what do you do with what you don't know. And the future is something where it's still left with unknown variables, right? So think of it this way, that the creature being present, if biologically existing in the moment, the consciousness has a sort of sense of meaning to the present in accordance to the past, right? So it's like our brains are just, okay, it's not like this, but let me say it's like a file cabinet, right? The previous files are suggesting the size of the folder, you know, the size of the moment. You know, if someone has done incredible things in the past, in the present they will feel incredible, you know. But if somebody hasn't done incredible things in the past, their present is kind of like it's an empty folder, you know. It's like, who deleted the files of my greatness, you know? But the person forgot for a moment, you know, that stage. So anyways, what I'm trying to say is that evolution has had in some sense, like what unconscious life really means is that we were only experiencing the present. We became conscious that we're actually a changing being in a changing world. Those changes became our archive, became our memories. And now when we look at the future, it's the potential of all the ways we have created memories for ourselves. What I'm trying to point to is that the unknown future, the future exists in our mind because there is something that has acknowledged the past it has gone through. You know? That means if the world was changing and nobody was noticing it's changing, and the reality would be treated like a photograph, right? But when it's like a film that's changing, you know, it's like right now, I'm not like a movie superstar, right? But when it comes to existence in the film of existence, I'm like an, like an underpaid actor, you know. I don't know. Being conscious and alive is like trying to solve a problem that can't have a measurable answer. You know, in these talks and just on my own, I've always had a hobby of just, checking out different quotes to get a sense of how human beings have looked at life so far. And in the middle of it, I was like, man, there's so many different human beings, so many different ways of coming to a conclusion of what reality means, that in some sense, it's like none of us are correct. Do you know? It's like when the micro wants to make a conclusion of the macrocosmic intelligence is like laughing, like look at this pipsqueak trying to, see the whole unobservable universe. But when it comes to the micro, when we have a macro perspective, you see, it's kind of like this. If you think you're a known entity and you have a relationship from the unknown, you're starting with an identification as the small and the big, right? But when it's the other way around, when it's a relationship with the macro, think of it this way. It's like in front of our eyes, we're having a microcosmic experience where the small and the big behind our eyes, because our mind has only itself to some degree, its own conscious capability. We are like the macrocosm. The human brain is a mini universe generator. It's a miniature universe generator. I think that's the cool way of saying it, right? That our brains right now, every person, even my neighbors, person, in some sense, is housing a hidden universe behind their eyes. The potential of this hidden universe is the future. How we feel about this future, I guess, connects to the title of the episode, live as if the future is already smiling, right? And what I mean by this, the future is already smiling, because philosophically a person can step out of the intellect. So what do I mean by this? A person, okay, let's say I'm a person with a specific knowledge. Again, the brain being suggested as a metaphor for like this filing system. Okay, so my brain is a folder, it has a bunch of files in it, right? And people are gonna be like, Mr. Within, are you already in the future? You know, your brain has files, you know? Can you imagine we can drag and drop memories in the future, just like how we drag and drop files now? You know, it's like somebody had a birthday celebration and then somebody missed it, and the person's like, oh man, I couldn't make it to your birthday. And you're like, no worries, man, here's the MP4 file from my memory. Here's my memory file. Really what it is that the brain seems to be using information just like the caveman used sticks and stones to make fire. Our brain is using sensory perception to individualize. How we feel about the information that we are treating as reality leads to a sense of our future. When I think about my future, sometimes it makes me laugh, not because, I feel that, actually on some level, I feel like, what was that guy's name? Neil Armstrong, who planted the flag on the moon. When I'm giving these talks, I already feel I've completed, I don't know why, but some part of me feels like I've already done this before. I've already completed this energetic experience. So there is a feeling, I guess it's rather than being intellectually describable, it's more like emotionally I already feel I'm already being in the future, but can you imagine somebody's crying and somebody comes and says, hey man, why are you crying, why are you so emotional? And the person's like, man, you don't understand, 100,000 years from now, our species is going to experience unnecessary suffering, And people are going to be like, you're crying for something that's going to happen 100,000 years from now? The person's like, man, most people are crying because they have regrets of the past. This person has a regret for not existing already in the future, 100,000 years in the future. 100,000 years is a bit too much, actually, in the future. It's 100,000 years in the future. What are we? We're space, everybody. Oh, man. To live as if the future is smiling, either in the present we did something so capable that we're certain it will remain in the future, as if we set something into motion that is an unstoppable victory for the human species. I find the idea of the advanced civilization to be this. But the concept of the future, it depends on the dimensions the person sees to themselves now. So when I look at, I'll share with the viewers how I'm seeing the own dimensions to my experience. I'm considering that right now, as I'm giving this talk, I have a visible life, a visible, physical life. Okay, so realistically, this biological body is kind of like a candle, and the candle is lit for some time, and eventually the light gets dim, and the candle has the memories of how bright it was when it was, when the flame was there. you know But when I consider the invisible dimensions, so it's kind of like I'm wondering what's going to happen to my body. That's, to some degree, there's an obvious understanding of that. When I think about what's going to happen to my mind, this is where the talks have a significance, right? Where something that while the person was alive, what did their energy lead to, right? And what is the endurance of that? So it's kind of like, the creation of our body is like 100 years, but the creation of our minds, thanks to cyberspace, we don't know how long. It could be like these Mr.Within talks, maybe in the future they're preserved and they I don't know. The future gets to hear them. But the mind is still non-physical, so to some degree, I just know that right now, my body is here without any effort. I don't have to put an effort to be a body, but I do have to put an effort to be a psychological entity, right? So when I'm giving this talk, there has to be an initial intent, right? When a person knows their intent in the moment, then it becomes very easy to just go and do something, right? It's like a thirsty person already knowing how to grab a glass of water and filling it up, how to grab a glass and fill it up with water. Like, it's like the confidence is instantaneously there because the person is expecting a result beyond the simple levels, right? So what I notice is that it requires effort. So the mind is something where the free will is like you put your foot on the gas pedal, effort, energy, yay, I'm giving a talk, But the body is just kind of there, and of course the intent of the mind can move the body. The experience I have of my own biological body is kind of like the world's life. I really feel like my existence is existence's life, right? Like somebody could be like, Mr.Within, you're nobody, and I'll be like, I'm being the universe right now. So existentially, my body is a part of the activity of Earth, of the planet and the universal sector and whatnot. But when I think about my mind, the invisible dimension of my life, I think about, okay, that's effort oriented. That means something has to push the gas pedal. So if it's kind of like there's this story in the Puranas, these ancient books written by Rishi Vyasa, this next level yogi. And in the Puranas, there's a story of this yogi, I don't remember the guy's name, but there was this yogi who was meditating his whole life. Back in the day, he was just trying to stay in samadhi. He was literally like a person who was trying to be in the perfect state of mind before he died so he could be enlightened. Like, they had that sort of ideological view back then, right? So the story goes, this guy's living like a renunciate yogi, is doing nothing, nothing is not attached to anything in the realm, right? He could sit somewhere and it's like his detachment is on such a dehumanized level that there's no emotion or anything. But something synchronistic happens to this guy, and one day this guy goes to the river to like wash his face or something, right? And the story goes that from the other side of the river there's this pregnant deer that is running away from this tiger. The deer runs to the river, runs through the river, gets to the other side, and it's been like hurt by the tiger, so the pregnant deer dies, the tiger is like left on the other side of the river, and the child of this deer is just left there, and this yogi is like WTF, you know, like right? And so this yogi feels this is a sign from the divine that he needs to take care of this deer. Okay. It's too cold. You know, I'm starting to realize, you know, Canada's probably not the best country for outdoor podcasting. So what ends up happening is that this yogi starts taking care of this baby deer, and he gets so attached to this baby deer that one day he's in his meditation and the baby deer is like right there chilling, right? But this guy doesn't know that he's about to die, right? And the moment he dies, right before he dies, the deer runs away. And the last thought this yogi has in his mind is like, where did the deer go? Right? And Rishi Vyasa in the Puranas says that this guy in his next lifetime reincarnates as a deer, but as a deer who has access to all the memories of his past lives. Right? So it was as if his mind's effort at that point of transitioning from the physical existence set out another simulation of the physical existence. So it's kind of like, just like there's an effort of our mind that moves our body, it seems to be that there's also an effort of mind that leads to reincarnation. So when I think about the future of my mind, pretty much while I'm alive, use it. If that moment's come where I'm about to leave this realm, most likely I would dissolve myself into silence and be a silent witness of everything that's moving in the moment. I would pretty much return to my presence. Right now, my presence has, let's say, incarnated as a personality. Right? But when I return to that unknown presence, I am not this. In this lifetime, I've had a privilege, you know. Sometimes when I say privilege, I mean in a mystical sense, right? I've experienced moments where something has happened in the moment, or some synchronicity, something so unique has happened in the moment where I just realize, whoa, there's something unknown here moving the moment, aside from how my knowledge is keeping reality. Right, so this is really what happens when you begin discovering the nature of your inner realms, or a person is still and silent to the degree that they have no opinion on anything, and then they get to see really what's moving in their mind, or how their mind is moving as the moment, right? And in those moments where I would say something happened which my personality, my ego felt hollow to itself, and the question came, if you don't have an ego, if you are not an idea right now, what is here then? Right? So this would be in some sense the inconceivable dimension. So visible dimension, invisible dimension, the inconceivable dimension of our being. Why inconceivable? Because it's instantaneous. Our knowledge is spread out in time. We need more than one moment to give a measurement to something, you know, to measure the change. So when I say that, so think of it this way, I'm like this guy saying there's a visible self, an invisible self, and an inconceivable self. When I say live as if the future is smiling, let's say we did realize, let's say, globally, or let's say whatever, let's say the human being suddenly realize, yo, there's an unknown presence to how my known personality is moving my known body. Right? So so that unknown presence, if a person becomes acquainted with it, they're going to realize that to be human is part of their mind. Somebody may be like, Mr. Within, what do you mean there's parallel lives? I'm saying all life is stemming out of an instant. Right now we're all fathoming it and thinking like, oh, yo, look at this changing world, and even me, sometimes I have this attitude where I'm like, okay, what's the point of 8 billion creatures on a rock? Build an advanced civilization to the end of time. Let's see what the most advanced potential of human intelligence is and all this. But that smiling future is not a human archetype. So it's like a person realizing the simplicity of how their moment is being, regardless of what changes in it. I have seen my body change. I have seen my thoughts come and go even faster than my body. Like I've had my psychology change. But there has always been something so simple, as a matter of fact, too simple, that has been observing instantaneously the divisions of reality. That means something is watching the moment that is not definable by the content in the moment. That is the unknown presence, or take it as the inconceivable self. There's so many games, sometimes in life there's too many games. I remember seeing this video from Carl Jung, and some interviewer was asking Carl Jung about introversion and extroversion. And Carl Jung, guys, this man is has a next level genius attention, and he realized that human beings, when it comes to their behavior, Carl Jung was pretty much saying that, let's take a human being for example, and this human being comes and meets a person, right, and they don't have an opinion, nothing, no emotion, nothing, right? But then, let's say there's a person who comes and sees someone who they have never seen before, but that person reminds them of like a friend, right? Or reminds them of something else, right? And so Carl Jung, or I'll give you an example. Imagine you see someone who reminds you of your father, but you've never met that person, right? So it would be like the question being like, okay, there's something in the background, in the subconscious or the unconscious of the human being, where that human being suddenly finds a familiarity with the moment, right? And the whole deal with introversion and extroversion is that, and I would say this is more my vision of it, right? Introversion is a state of mind where the familiarity of the moment has not been confirmed. So anybody who finds themselves in an unfamiliar moment, what happens? You become cautious, right? You watch around. There's a sort of silence. I think this has an evolutionary thing, right? Imagine a bunch of hunters back in the day, walking, and suddenly one of them hears the bushes move, right? Suddenly everybody is silent. Everybody becomes introverted when they're trying to figure out what's happening outside. But once you know what's happening outside, or you have a trust of the external reality, then, you go free, you party without another, it's like the whole YOLO thing happens, But what Carl Jung was pointing to is that there are conscious archetypes which we embody, right? But there's also unconscious archetypes, and it's another way of saying the unknown world holds within it. Think of it this way, like seeds. Imagine the unknown world is like, the unconscious is like this massive garden, and inside the unconscious there's seeds planted, right? And when a certain experience is had, suddenly the seed sprouts. Suddenly an archetype that was in the unconscious becomes consciously accessible. For me personally, something that encouraged me to, inspired me to give talks and whatever, right? I mean, of course, it's kind of funny. When I was really young, I have a twin brother. I think I was like 7 or something. I remember my father in Iran. He was somebody who was having spiritual gatherings in a theocracy. That means, I remember me and my brother sitting beside my father, and my father would speak to a crowd of people, but not in a religious context, more in a metaphysical context, But his views are different than mine, What I'm trying to say is that at some point, I realized there's a incredible value and fascination with being capable of communicating reality. They say if you see something, say something. Philosophers saw an unknown world, they said something. Mystics, in some sense, they saw something and did something, right? So those who communicate about the unknown, to some degree, let's say philosophers or continental philosophers, and in some sense those who go to experience the unknown, to wonder about the true nature of reality, because why else are we in a world that can be understood? The mystical experience is having a relationship with the unknown. Guys, it's so cold, the cold is making me cough. I think if somebody was giving a podcast in the Ice Age, it would feel like how I'm feeling right now. It's so cold. Can you imagine? I mean, if I had a time machine, I would probably go to different moments in history and just silently give a talk there. Ultimately, what can I say? We have minds for existence to not be convinced by just its existence. We could have totally, consciousness could have never needed to evolve, right? There seems to, even though we shouldn't try to see, abstract purpose in, let's say, meaningless evolutionary reality, right? But sometimes I feel like, why did consciousness become conscious of its own suffering? Why did we evolve 4.5 billion years just to notice how small and we are in the cosmos, or how the hardships of life and whatever, right? So in some sense, we have become conscious of our suffering, and I ask myself, why, right? Why can I notice the inefficiency. And the only view that comes to my mind is that if you are an entity that notices suffering, most likely there's an ability to notice more than the suffering. So we have to take whatever that is happening to us now as something that is actually creating the potential of what will happen. I choose to live as if the future is already smiling in my inner realms, right? In my vision of humanity, I'm like, why not, right? It's like what are the options? Either defeat or victory when it comes to the species and its continuity in this world, right? So it's as if you have an option between two, let's say between a soda pop and like a glass of water. It's like you can choose the glass of water. If somebody says, how is the future smiling? It's smiling if we care for it, if we see it. I've realized that anything that the person doesn't care for, usually it like slowly leaves them. Whether it's people, objects, whatever, right? And what's hilarious is if the species doesn't care for its future and doesn't try at least to envision, a sort of advanced future, it's like we missed out. If we don't care for the future, it's as if we're throwing our trash in their world. If somebody says, Mr. Within, you talk about these dimensions to the self in regards to a visible dimension, invisible dimension, inconceivable dimension. How do these feel, right? In the physical dimension, we have, in some sense, a sort of sensation of course, it's temperature-based mainly, but, there's pain and there's pleasure, pleasurable sensation. When it comes to the mind, I think this is a good question. How does my mind feel to me? Like my whole mind. It feels like my mind feels like I'm watching how the moment is moving, to be honest. So I would say the feeling for the mind, if the bodies, we have pain and pleasure, and of course, we say the mind experiences this. It's like atoms don't have emotions. But sophisticated organized atoms sculpted after 4.5 billion years, they do. If I wonder how does my inconceivable self feel to me, this is the cool thing about realizing the unknown. You can't know it. There's nothing to know. Our whole lives we're living as if we want to know truth, right? But if truth is a state, the state is positioning our knowledge. So when it comes to the unknown, you know what it is? It's kind of like this cosmos, this world is so strange that it's designed to not make sense and make sense at the same time. It microcosmically makes sense, macrocosmically it's a question mark to the end of time, or maybe until we become a Kardashevian scale type 6 civilization or something. Oh my god. Due to survival reasons, guys, I gotta go inside. Who knows? I may give another talk later on. But I guess what I want to leave the viewers with is that sometimes we get so convinced in how we already know the world that we don't wonder how else we can know it. And the future's ability is based on our ability. If the species is convinced by the past to stop trying new things, right? In some sense, there's a sort of it's like I have this view that we as living creatures should go as far as possible and then pass the torch down to the next generations. Or what it would feel like being born in an advanced civilization would be as if born in a world that already knows where it's going. Rather than us having to give it meaning. To be a human being in a world, it's like suddenly opening your eyes and you're in a car, right? You're in a car that's being driven. Imagine a self-automated car, right? And this automated car is already driving. You've opened your eyes, you're inside it, and now the question comes: what's the meaning of this, right? The world is moving us before we can interpret its movement, or the world's movement. It's kind of like a human being's understanding is like how the whole universe is choosing to look at itself from a little corner of it, right? So that's the reality of the mystery. It's like there's the known and the unknown, but then there's the known static, known dynamic, and then we have the unknown static and unknown dynamic view, right? That means our minds make the unknown movement of the world known. So we have a sort of strategy to exist in accordance to whatever changes appear, right? But at the same time, to realize the unknown means to discover the limitation of individual life. Right now, our species has not understood the limitations of individual life, because there's so many things we haven't done yet. But if we were to envision a future, imagine in the future technology has made human beings immortal, right? And technology has resolved all the issues of natural disasters and whatever, right? And there will come a point where at some point we'll be like, do we want to endlessly exist in our limited knowledge, or should we wonder about an experience that surpasses the human archetype? For me, a part of me feels that the future, just like how we're being conscious, the individual's consciousness is being experienced through the body, I feel in the future it's going to be the evolution of consciousness is to realize that everything is the birthright of nothing, So it's like something invisible is interacting with the visible and then accepting the shape. But once we realize we are a force, like right now the life force is translated into the human creature. But if we realize, wait a minute, it's not just a human life, it's a human life force, so then in some sense there comes just a relationship of life, a relationship of intelligence with life as a force. So when I say the inconceivable dimension of self, I am saying that there is a way that energy is happening energy is intelligently happening prior to personality being able to even notice the intelligence happening, which is a suggestion that either the universe, the world is alive, or we are inside the imagination of a greater dimension. That means we are being thoughts of a worldly being, of a cosmic being. Imagine we're being the imagination of the cosmos, and and then the cosmos is being our imagination. It's like this, cycle of abstract life, the abstract cycle of life. The world brings a creature to notice it. It's as if the universe imagined the human being, and now the human being is imagining the universe. Because the most bizarre thing about the idea of the soul, which is something that can never die or be born, right? And in some senses is that which transmigrates from, in the Buddhist perspective, yogic perspective, it transmigrates from lifetime to lifetime based on its insight. But and the concept of energy also, there's this view, it cannot be created or destroyed, but it changes from form to form. If something cannot be created or destroyed, that means it doesn't change. So it's as if this whole time there has been a changeless presence to how everything in the world is changing. That changeless presence has two positions for now. I would, if I was to say this to a secular audience, where it's as if space is holding matter, but also the intelligence of man's mind is holding matter. So consciousness, so think of it this way, the inner consciousness is acting as a sort of space for the matter in the world, but the outer world's space is also the space. So it's kind of like the unknownness we find when it comes to who is looking through our eyes is the same unknownness of what is holding the whole moment. And really, it's an interaction with time. Our species discovered time. Time is a relationship of a creature with the world. Anyways, what can I say? We use what we have. The species has to embrace a collective honor. What is missing from people's lives is a collective honor. Back in the day, right now the collective honor is limited to nationalism, but that's ridiculous when there's, there should be, it should go towards planetarianism, a sort of humanism, human beings on a planet rather than, creatures and ideologies that give them more reasons to see differences among each other than similarities, right? The mind has an ability for both. Really, the future smiles if the present activates its potential. Live as if the future is already smiling, because why not? We are the world's potential in the eyes of man. Thanks for listening, guys. Much blessings. Rise, mankind, rise.